I was standing on the side of the stage, the spot most funeral home directors post up when it's time to run the service. Dad had been dead for less than a week, but it appeared that this was not the sort of work that you could take bereavement. Well, I guess maybe you could, but where would you go? Some other funeral home for monster people? My day had started with a loud knock at the back door to the mortuary. That happened to be the front door of our little house above the mortuary, and after the third knock, I decided that it wasn't a dream and got up to see who was banging on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning. I winced as I came down on a model plane that had fallen off its fishing line from the ceiling and decided for the 100th time that I needed to redecorate this room. The same band posters I had hung up in high school were here, as well as the game maps and model planes and all the other things that had ensured that I hadn't lost my virginity until I was at least 22. Her name was Gretchen, and she kind of smelled like formaldehyde. She was brilliant when it came to fixing up corpses for viewings. Too much information? I tend to overshare sometimes. Standing at the door of my home was a man who took up most of the doorway. He looked like he had just rolled out of a Humvee somewhere in Iraq and was ready to liberate some oil right out from under my residence. Behind him were 3 black town cars, each containing 4 other equally as scary-looking men in black suits and visible holsters. The man looked down at me. The patchwork gray and black and reddish hair I could see sticking out from under the baseball cap reminded me of the brindle hound that we kept for a while when I was a kid. Unlike my childhood dog, this guy looked like he lived under the stair-stepper at a Planet Fitness and ate guys who couldn't lift more than 250 pounds. Ground their bones to make his protein shakes kind of guy. Is kind of what I thought, but I did not say. See, I can be subtle. He tipped his sunglasses down to show me a pair of perfect amber eyes, but I found it hard not to stare at the clearly fake human ears sewn into the side of his hat. "You the mortician?" he asked, and I realized that this wasn't Mr. Caro. This was the guy from the phone, Jericho. Yeah, where's Mr. Caro? Jericho turned and told his guys to begin setting up and securing the perimeter. He stepped into my mother's kitchen and I saw him curl his lip as he looked around at the happy cows that decorated the walls and the decor. Mom had made her kitchen look like a field of cows, and Dad had indulged her in making it look a little too much like that in that regard. I mean, who else has a faucet that looks like a smiling cow's mouth? A ceiling fan where the light bulbs are udders, peel and stick flooring that's black and white. Mom had every knick-knack and bit of cow crap that she could find. Sort of like having a real cow in the kitchen. She was stacked. "So, what happened with Mr. Caro?" I asked as Mr. Jericho took a seat at the table and made it look like dollhouse furniture. The chair creaked menacingly, and I was afraid that he was going to get a look at the funeral floor before I let him into the building. The chair held, and I breathed a sigh of relief as he steepled his fingers and looked darkly at me. "Emergency assignment," he growled. "I dropped the price to 26 denarii for the trouble." I nodded, gulping as he continued to stare at me. Very good. Thanks for that," I said. "Payment is up front," he growled, holding out a hand. Let me get that for you," I said, moving back towards the bedroom. I counted out 26 of the weird coins, but just holding them in my hand looked kinda lame. I went over to the desk and looked through something to put them in, passing up a plastic baggie and an old bag that held Barry Bott's every flavor bean. I found a little Crown Royal bag, and after dumping out the D&D dice out of it, the coins fit pretty nice inside. I put them in my pocket and then realized that I was still wearing pajamas. 10 minutes later, I had just put on something a little more accessible for a trip to Walmart and came out to give Mr. Jericho his money. I froze when I smelled bacon and eggs cooking and heard my mom's voice wafting from the kitchen. "Do you like them scrambled or sunny side up?" "Really, ma'am, you don't have to," Mr. Jericho began, but my mother cut him off. "I insist. I won't see one of Tyler's friends off without a little something in his belly. Do you need more coffee? Or maybe some cream?" Black is fine. Thank you, ma'am." I came back to the cow yard to find Mr. Jericho with a muffin, toast, bacon, and jelly, sipping coffee and looking at me as if he thought that I could rescue him. My mom came bustling over and tipped eggs onto his plate, seeing me, and smiled as she pointed out an empty plate at the table. "There you are, sweetie," she said, going back to the stove. "I was just tending to your friend here. Have a seat, and I'll have your eggs in just a second." I smiled at Jericho and passed him the bag of coins while Mom was busy at the stove. He raised an eyebrow at the bag and shrugged before he pocketed it. He shoveled the eggs and bacon down fast enough to make me think that his jaw might unhinge, and drank down the coffee with a single gulp. The phone rang in the other room. My mother still has a landline for some reason, and she ran off to go get it. "Does she know?" Jericho growled, nodding at her. "I don't think so," I said. "If she does, then she hides it really well." "Good," he said. "Keep it that way. She's a nice lady. No need to wrap her up in all this." Mom came back in, talking about how Aunt Helen wanted to come pick her up for a girls' day in a few, and I would have to manage lunch for myself. "Thank you for the lovely breakfast, ma'am," Jericho said, getting up. "Mortician, we'll be setting up outside when you get ready to open up. I want to have a look around the chapel and the entrances and the exits before the services begin. Rendezvous will be at the front at 07:30. He nodded to my mom and left, the chair creaking happily after he had gotten up. "Such a nice man," she said. "If he's one of the boys who plays Wizards and Whimsy with you or whatever it is." "No, Mom," I said, taking his muffin and savoring it. "I don't think he's playing anything." I made Jericho wait till 07:35 because I'm kind of an ass. Also, I couldn't find my tie, so I had to improvise. Jericho cocked an eye at the red tie that I had selected to replace it with, and I rolled my eyes. I know, no one wears a red tie with a black suit, and I'm hoping my black tie is in the office. Hey, far be it for me to judge your fashion sense. I'm just the muscle. Speaking of, I said, unlocking the mortuary. Why did I need so much muscle again? Jericho didn't follow me in, and when I looked back, he was looking at me in disbelief. You have to be joking, right? No, not so much, I said, wondering if I needed to invite him in. I didn't think Jericho was a vampire, but I wasn't sure what he was, honestly. Persians, Jericho intoned. Ever heard of them? Isn't that guy from mythology who slew the Medusa? I asked, Jericho finally stepping over the threshold and coming inside. His combat boots glumped on the carpet, and I tried not to notice the stains on the toe. Someone was likely short a few teeth if they were still alive. Perseus was, yes. The Persians are a fringe group who hunt Gorgon in his time. I am sure that he is spinning like DMX in the Elysium fields over it too. Anyway, they also do hunt other things as well, like the Manticore, the Minotaur, Chimera, but they love Gorgons. Really gets their tridents hard, if you know what I'm saying. I thought about the troubling mental image as I took him around and showed him the entrances and exits to the place. I mean, you guys look like you've had enough firepower to take out a couple of guys with swords and reflective shields. Jericho laughed. Oh, these guys don't do that anymore. They find that shotguns and machetes work better. These guys aren't some hick trophy hunters either. They're generational monster killers, and something like this will be too good to pass up. We've got a spotter though, so it shouldn't be too difficult to nip this in the bud. We talked a little more about details, but when Jericho realized it was after 8, he took his leave and said that he'd be outside if we needed anything. I spent the next few hours getting everything ready and making the last of the preparations. I found my black tie in the embalming room, for some reason, and decided to use the red one as a pocket flourish. The black suit was nice, but it did need a little bit of color. When 11 o'clock hit, I opened the doors and waited for the first of my guests to arrive. The sisters came first, arriving in a rented town car, and Marge and Selma were looking resplendent in their morning attire. They had a few other Gorgons with them, cousins, Selma told me in passing, and as the Escalade pulled up, I was suddenly glad that I was off the main drag. A pair of cow people, and I don't mean the inclusive term for cowboys, climbed out, their suits immaculate if not bulging oddly in places not meant to contain animal legs or joints. They shook my hand, thanking me for such a lovely service, and I tried to figure out how they had hooves on their feet but fingers on their hands. A score of pot-bellied Danny DeVito types followed them in an honest-to-God wood-paneled station wagon, their horns barely contained under black baseball caps and their loafers hardly containing their stubby hooves. Their dates were calmly young women whose flower crowns that contrasted with their mourning dresses. They all thanked me, and most asking when the eats would be served before waddling in. Jericho was in the front door, and I kid you not, he growled at a couple of buff guys in togas, both having arrived on a Pegasus that stood cropping grass once they hopped off, and they did something that I could only describe as hairing up when they returned his growl. He unbristled as he let them in, and he shook his head when I asked them what that was about. "Strays," he said cryptically. "Don't know why they just don't get a job and pack." I asked him what the hell that meant, and he said, "Exactly," and refused to answer further. The trouble didn't start until a gold Camaro pulled in, almost clipping a family of Manticore who growled and spit as they picked up a couple of Manticore kids who were downright adorable. Selma had been talking to Jericho at the door, flouncing her snakes, and asked about Mr. Caro when her eyes suddenly turned fiery and she stomped towards the buff guy who'd climbed out of the golden death trap.
"Oh no, not you. You don't get to come here. Not after what you did."
She was walking fast towards the man, and by his Colgate smile, he seemed more amused than angry.
"Come on, Sully. You aren't still mad about that, are you?" "I was, I am, and I will be. I would curse you to sit on the banks of Tartarus for all of time if I wasn't over my limit for the year already. I could always use a new statue for my garden, however, if you'd like to push it."
She was reaching for her veil, and since Jericho clearly had better senses than I did, I decided to get in the middle of it. Whoa, let's not make a scene. Sir, I don't know who you are, but this is
"You'll know who I am,"
the man said, striking a pose that would make a J. Crew model swoon.
"I am Postumus, the demigod of being a sleaze and a cheating asshat,"
Selma screamed, her hand still contemplating ripping off the veil and making him uncomfortably rigid.
"How was I supposed to know she was your sister?" "You could have asked. When you came to see another Gorgon you meet on Monster Mash and picked her up in the chariot from the same damn cave."
Selma was getting heated, and the side eye our little group was getting from the family of Manticore was decidedly bombastic.
"Sully, come on,"
the guy said, really turning on the charm.
"You know you're my one and only. That thing with Patty, it didn't mean nothing. Come on, let's get some dinner. Let's talk about it. You know you can't live without your little snake charmer,"
he said as he flexed his arms alluringly. "Hey, pretty boy," Jericho said, and I jumped as I realized that he was behind me. "The lady said that she didn't want you here. This is a funeral. Why don't you respect that unless you want yours to be the next one that you attend?" The demigod looked at Jericho and smirked, something I'm guessing was a first for Jericho.
"Haven't you got a ball to chase, hound? Don't make me crate you and send you back to Hades."
"Try it," Jericho growled, "and I'll show you why Apollo won't fly over my house anymore. Don't be so quick to join your brother in the hereafter, punk." Jericho appeared to have won this little battle back and forth because the demigod scoffed and held up the universal sign to call him to Selma before hopping back into his car and peeling out. "Well, that was something," I said, patting Jericho on the arm. "Good job, Jericho. You more than make up for the price tag." Jericho looked down at me, and I put my hand back where it belonged. He stalked back to the door, and I realized that it was almost time to get started. Jericho put a hand out before I could go inside, whispering, "This is going to be the dangerous part. If they attack, it'll be during the service. Be on your toes, and keep the clients safe if they do." "How do I—" "Just keep the doors locked, and keep everyone inside. Here," he said, handing me a radio, "in case you need to get in touch with me. It shouldn't come to that, but if it does, make sure that you are ready." I nodded, not really having any idea what he was talking about, but decided to play it by ear. I came in to find some of the women in flower crowns had harps set up on the stage. Since none of them had so much as a clamshell bag, I got the sneaking suspicion that they had grown them. They were all softwood and delicate strings, and as they started playing in earnest, I realized it was a string rendition of Bittersweet Symphony. It was beautiful, probably one of the most haunting things that I'd ever heard. And when they stopped, Marge mounted the stage and thanked everyone for coming.
Petrifissa was my sister and roommate for centuries. We shared so many things. Room, food, boyfriends, statues, nights on the couch just watching The Bachelor and eating whatever had wandered in. She was my best friend. And I miss her every day. She was taken too soon. A fate that awaits many of us. I remember the last thing that she said to me.
Marge looked into the middle distance as if trying to remember something from a lifetime ago, her eyes misting with tears.
I'm just going out for a bite. It's nothing to lose your head over.
Marge sniffed, laughing a little as she thought about it.
It's almost funny,
she said, laughing and crying at the same time as she toddled off the stage. Selma took her place, still looking surly, and I thought that it might be to hide the tears.
Petrifissa was my middle sister. We had our differences and we had our squabbles, but I wouldn't have wished this on her or anyone. Sometimes, when we were gorgonlings, she would sit with me when it rained and I would braid her hair. She was afraid of the rain for some reason, and she thought that it was funny how the snakes would squirm and writhe in the braids when it was done.
Selma laughed at the little memory, her own eyes getting a little misty.
I miss her. I miss fighting with her over clothes. I miss yelling at her for stealing my boyfriends. I miss when she would come into my room and say that she was sorry and we would cry together. Who will I cry with now?
She asked, returning to her seat as the waterworks began. I heard something outside, the strings taking up a heart-rendering version of Freebird, but I put it out of my mind. By the 4-minute mark, apparently, the women didn't do abridged versions, and I recognized the sound as the whump of the high-powered rifle. I picked up the radio, stepping off stage a little, and asking Jericho if everything was 10-4 out there. 10-4 was the width and breadth of my radio lingo, so I hope he didn't want more than 10 codes.
Just some pests. Nothing we can't take care of,
Jericho growled. At the 6-minute mark, there was chatter of an automatic rifle. Some of the others had started to take notice. The Minotaurs were looking nervously at the doors, the Danny DeVitos were rocking a little as they sweated into the armpits of their suits, and I could see one of the Manicore kids climb into their dad's lap. Selma and Marge had noticed too, but they were clearly confident that everything was fine. I wasn't so sure, especially when something shook the building like an explosion might have gone off somewhere nearby. For the first time in my life, I was aware of how strange our chapel hall was. There was no stained glass windows, no windows of any sort, and the whole thing was slightly recessed in the ground, setting about 3 feet into the foundation. It was like any other chapel that I had ever seen, and I knew from experience that Dad had brought us here when the TV talked about a tornado warning. "It can survive worse than a twister, son," he said once when I asked why we always came here, and I wondered if this is what he meant. As Freebird ended, some of the other ensemble came up to make small speeches. One of the Minotaur talked about how she had introduced her to her husband, and I just realized that one of them was a female. Go figure. A couple of the DeVitos came up to talk about what a good friend and lover she had been. The Manicore talked about how she had always been a loyal friend. This was all given with the backdrop of gunfire from outside as whatever was going on out there continued to go on. The creatures weathered it well, only wincing every now and again when something loud happened, and the ceremony came to a close on time. Selma and Marge came together, thanking those who had come for being here, and that was when all hell broke loose. Something hit the door very hard from the outside, and the returning chatter of gunfire was only slightly muffled. Selma told them that as soon as they had the all clear from security, There was going to be a reception in the fellowship hall, and when someone hit the door this time, it sounded heavy. "Jericho?" I asked, but there was no answer. It hit the door 3 more times, and when they popped open, everyone screamed and got down below the benches. There was no mean feat for a few of them. The Minotaurs especially were mostly just getting as low as possible, and as the 2 men strode in, I got my first look at a Persian. Both of them were blonde, but it was clearly bottle as opposed to natural. They had machetes and belt sheaths in their hips, shotguns on their shoulders, and the lead one was stalking up the aisle like he had just found the N64 under the tree on Christmas morning. "Attention, various monsters, hybrids, and everything in between. We are not interested in you today. We wanted the other 2 sisters for our trophy wall. We knew if we gave up the one head," he said, his boots making a grating sound on the carpet as he walked, "we'd get the old trifecta." I looked at the 2 sisters, both of them cowering as they hid behind the podium. Why didn't they just unveil and blast these guys? And the closer that they got, the more that I expected it, and the less likely it seemed. Man, no wonder they killed so many of these guys. Looking at the ensembled crowd, I saw all of them cowering and trying not to be noticed as the psychopaths got closer and closer to their target. The monsters I had grown up reading about were really not that impressive, and I began to wonder if the stories were being propped up by the heroes to make them sound cooler than they actually were. Looking around, I had an idea, but I would have to be quick. This probably wasn't going to get any return business from the ensemble creatures, but it was worth a shot. I stumbled forward, coming close to the casket, and slipped my knife under. I was a deft stitch, but my buck knife was sharp. It went through the stitches like a scalpel, and as the guys came up close to the casket, I stood up and yelled for everyone to close their eyes. The 2 bottle blondes turned equally dumb looks my way, but the rest of them seemed to get the idea when they saw me rise up with Patty's head in my hands. I had her gripped by the headscarf, the snakes writhing weakly against my fingers, and when I flicked the pin out of one eye, I tried to think of something really cool to yell as they caught it full in the face. "Petrificus totalis!" I finally settled on, and as the 2 turned to stone, I turned around gingerly and put the head back in the casket, closing the lid. "Sorry, ladies, but I think the rest of the service is going to have to be a closed casket." And to my absolute shock, the ensemble creatures began to clap. Some of the DeVitos even whistled loudly, and I expected the sisters to be mad, but they both wrapped their arms around me and hugged me while laughing. All in all, the only one who was mad was Jericho. "You had," he huffs, his arms hanging at his side as he came stumbling in, "the perfect chance to say something really cool. And you yell a Harry Potter line." I shrugged. It was the best that I could do on such short notice, so sue me." He laughed along with the rest after that, and it really broke up the tension. It appeared that I had survived my first funeral. "I can't believe you're going to eat that," I said, turning a little green as Jericho ate the raw meat on the paper plate in his hand. The funeral guests were chowing down, many of them laughing as they told stories about Petrificus. The DeVitos were munching on bugs that had been cooked on skewers, and the Minotaurs slurping raw beef by the forkload, and the rest had laid into both with gusto. Selma was laughing like a loon, and the wine was clearly getting to her head, and she sprayed cricket legs and wine on Marge without meaning to. The whole event was back to being a grand affair, and I was glad. "What?" Jericho said. "I've been wounded. I need to heal up, and the food is the best way to do that." I had been too polite to ask until this point, but decided to address the elephant in the room. Like the fact that Jericho had sprouted big gray ears on the top of his head, which, in contrast, was a striking difference. I mean, those ears were absolutely adorable. They were extremely fluffy, but on top of such a hulking, hound-like man, it was a little odd. "So, how long have you been a dog man?" Jericho looked at me darkly. "I am not a dog man. I am a hellhound," he said, turning back to the other bite of the bloody steak. "Okay, how long have you been a hellhound then?" He thought about it, chewing wetly. Over 2,000 years, I guess. So, how do you... Don't go there, kid. We ain't there yet, he said, finishing his steak and holding out the plate for another. The more he ate, the less noticeable his features became. 2 steaks later, he was back to his same old muscly self. So, did you lose anybody today? Jericho shook his head. Short of decapitation, we're really hard to kill. The 2 you dealt with got the jump on me, and they wouldn't have made it that far. I've got a couple of guys who were wounded, but that's about it. Consider yourself lucky. I charge double for fatalities. I gulped. Duly noted. Selma came back up and hugged me, planting a kiss on my cheek as she thanked me for the beautiful ceremony and the rescue.
Here's a little something for being so brave,
she said, putting a little stack of denarii in my pocket before patting my butt and walking off. Is it always like this? I asked Jericho, watching the partygoers get progressively more blasted. You're the mortician, not me. But yeah, pretty much. When you live as long as some of us do, you take death very seriously. You mourn the dead like we did in the times of our gods, with wine, with food, with friends, and with good memories. I nodded, smiling at Jericho as the funeral went on into the wee hours of the morning. I knew that the hangover that I would have the next day would be well worth it.